This story comes from a former night shift nurse named Emily, who worked at a large, bustling city hospital for over a decade. Emily was a seasoned professional, pragmatic and unflappable. She'd seen it all, from the bizarre to the tragic, and very little surprised her. Until the night she encountered the phantom patient. The hospital was a sprawling complex, with several wings and multiple floors. Emily primarily worked in the intensive care unit (ICU), a place where life and death often hung in a delicate balance. The ICU was always busy, even at night, but there were moments, usually between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., when a strange quiet would descend, a lull before the next emergency. It was during one of these lulls, on a particularly cold and rainy Tuesday night in late November, that Emily first noticed something amiss. She was at the nurse's station, charting, when she heard the distinct sound of a call bell from room 7. This was unusual. Room 7 was empty. It had been empty for 2 days, awaiting a new admission. Emily glanced at the monitor. The light for room 7 was indeed illuminated. She frowned, thinking it must be a malfunction. She walked over to the room, expecting to find a faulty sensor or a misplaced piece of equipment. The door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the window. The bed was stripped, the medical equipment powered down. There was no one there. Emily checked the call bell unit on the wall. It was off. She double-checked the monitor at the nurse's station. The light for room 7 was now dark. Must be the old wiring, she muttered to herself, shaking her head. The hospital was old, and quirks were common. But then it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Always room 7. Always between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. And always, when Emily went to investigate, the room would be empty, and the call bell light would extinguish itself just as she arrived. Emily started to feel a prickle of unease. She mentioned it to a few of her colleagues, who mostly laughed it off, attributing it to sleep deprivation or the hospital's notorious ghost stories. Every old hospital had them, after all. One night, however, the call bell from room 7 rang, and this time, Emily wasn't charting. She was walking past the room, heading to the break room for a quick coffee. She heard the distinct, insistent ring and saw the light on the monitor flicker on. She stopped dead in her tracks. She looked directly at the door of room 7. As she watched, the door slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to close. It wasn't a slam or a creak from a draft. It was a deliberate, silent closing, as if someone was gently pulling it shut from the inside. Emily felt a cold dread creep up her spine. She stood there for a full minute, staring at the now closed door. The call bell light remained on. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open again. The room was still empty. The bed was still stripped. But this time, the air was heavy, thick with a scent she couldn't quite place, something sweet, yet cloying like decaying flowers. She walked further into the room, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. She checked the bathroom, the closet. Nothing. As she turned to leave, she heard a faint whisper, a barely audible sigh, coming from the corner of the room. "Help me." Emily froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She spun around, shining her light into the corner. There was nothing there. Just the blank wall, the 4-pole, the empty space. She ran out of the room, her professionalism momentarily forgotten. She practically sprinted back to the nurse's station, her hands shaking as she tried to compose herself. She told her supervisor what she'd heard, but the supervisor, a tired woman named Carol, just patted her arm and suggested she take a break. "It's a long night, Carol said. "You're probably just hearing things." But Emily knew she wasn't. The whisper had been too clear, too distinct. And the scent, it lingered in her nostrils. Over the next few weeks, the occurrences in room 7 escalated. The call bell would ring more frequently. The door would open and close on its own. And sometimes, Emily would hear faint scratching sounds coming from inside the empty room, like fingernails dragging across the surface. One night, Emily was the only nurse on duty in her section of the ICU. A severe storm had knocked out power to parts of the city, and the hospital was running on generators. The emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows down the corridors, making the already eerie atmosphere even more unsettling. The call bell from room 7 rang, loud and insistent. Emily, despite her growing fear, felt a surge of anger. She was tired of this. She was tired of being scared. She grabbed a flashlight and marched towards the room, determined to find a logical explanation. She flung the door open. The room was dark, but this time it wasn't empty. Standing at the foot of the bed, silhouetted against the faint light from the window, was a figure. It was tall and gaunt, with long, stringy hair that hung down to its waist. It was wearing what looked like a tattered hospital gown. Emily gasped, dropping her flashlight. It clattered to the floor, rolling under the bed. The room was plunged into near total darkness. She could still see the figure, a darker shadow against the slightly less dark window. And then it moved. It glided towards her, its movements slow and deliberate. Emily could hear a faint, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. She stumbled backward, her hand reaching for the doorframe. As the figure drew closer, she could make out more details. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes were sunken, hollow pits. Its mouth was open in a silent scream, and a thin stream of what looked like black liquid was trickling from its lips. Emily finally found her voice. She screamed, a raw, terrified sound that echoed through the quiet ICU. She turned and ran, not caring where she was going, just needing to get away. She didn't stop until she reached the nurse's station, gasping for breath. Carol, her supervisor, rushed over, her face filled with concern. Emily, what happened? What's wrong? Emily tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come out. She was shaking uncontrollably, tears streaming down her face. Carol, seeing her distress, called for backup and helped Emily to a chair. 2 security guards arrived, and Emily, after composing herself, told them what she had seen. They were skeptical, but they agreed to check room 7. They returned a few minutes later, reporting that the room was empty and there was no sign of an intruder. Emily knew what she had seen. She knew it wasn't a hallucination or a trick of the light. She resigned from her position a week later. She couldn't bring herself to step foot in that hospital again. Years later, Emily learned the truth about room 7. A patient named Sarah Jenkins had died in that room almost 50 years ago. She had been a young woman suffering from a rare, aggressive form of cancer. She had been in immense pain and had often rung her call bell, pleading for more medication for relief. But the nurses, overwhelmed and understaffed, had often been slow to respond. Sarah Jenkins had died alone in room 7, her call bell ringing unanswered. And according to hospital legend, her spirit had been trapped there ever since, forever ringing for help that would never come. Emily still works as a nurse, but she avoids night shifts whenever possible. And she never, ever ignores a call bell, no matter how faint. Our second story comes from Mark, a medical student doing his residency in a busy urban emergency room. Mark was a driven, ambitious young man, eager to learn and unafraid of the gruesome realities of emergency medicine. He believed in science, in logic, in what he could see and touch. Until his rotation in the old wing of the hospital. The hospital, like many in the city, had an older section that was rarely used. It was a labyrinth of dimly lit corridors, disused operating theaters, and patient rooms that had been sealed off for decades. The air in that wing was perpetually cold, even in summer, and carried a faint, musty scent of decay. Mark's rotation required him to spend a few weeks in the hospital's archives, located in the basement of this old wing. His task was to digitize old patient records, a tedious but necessary job. He was often alone down there, surrounded by dusty files and the oppressive silence of the unused floors above. He quickly fell into a routine. He would arrive early, before the main hospital became too busy, and work until late afternoon. The only sounds were the hum of the old fluorescent lights and the occasional creak of the building settling. One afternoon, as he was meticulously scanning a patient's chart from the 1950s, he heard a faint, rhythmic tapping sound coming from the floor above him. It sounded like someone was tapping a fingernail against a hard surface, a slow, deliberate rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Mark paused his work, listening. The tapping continued, seemingly coming from directly above his head. He knew the floor above was entirely empty, filled with disused patient rooms. He tried to rationalize it, perhaps a loose pipe or the building settling. He resumed his scanning, but the tapping continued, a persistent, irritating sound that slowly began to grate on his nerves. He tried to ignore it, but it seemed to grow louder, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. Finally, frustrated, Mark decided to investigate. He climbed the creaking stairs to the floor above. The corridor was dark, the air even colder than in the basement. He walked slowly, his footsteps echoing in the silence, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. The tapping led him to room 312. The door was closed, but the sound was clearly coming from within. Mark hesitated, a strange sense of apprehension washing over him. He reached for the doorknob, his hand trembling slightly. It was cold to the touch. He pushed the door open. The room was identical to all the others, a stripped bed, a bedside table, a single chair. Dust motes danced in the faint light filtering through the grimy window. The tapping stopped the moment he entered. Mark looked around, his eyes scanning every corner of the room. Nothing. He checked under the bed, in the closet. Still nothing. He was about to leave, convinced it was just his imagination, when he noticed something on the bedside table. A small, antique silver locket. It was open, and inside, there was a faded photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. As Mark reached for it, he heard the faint, rhythmic tapping again. It was coming from the locket itself. Tap, tap, tap. Mark dropped the locket as if it had burned him. It clattered to the floor, the tapping immediately ceasing. He stared at it, his mind reeling. He picked it up again, carefully, and held it to his ear. Nothing. He opened it, closed it. Still nothing. He left the locket on the bedside table and quickly exited the room, a chill running down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold air. He returned to the archives, his heart pounding. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just encountered something inexplicable. Over the next few days, the tapping continued. It would follow him, sometimes from the floor above, sometimes from the room next door, sometimes even from the archives themselves. It was always the same rhythmic tap, tap, tap. Mark started researching the history of the old wing. He found records indicating that the wing had been closed down in the 1960s due to a series of unexplained patient deaths. The official cause was listed as a virulent strain of pneumonia, but there were whispers of something more sinister. He also found a patient record for a young woman named Clara Jenkins, who had died in room 312 in 1958. Her cause of death was listed as pneumonia, but the notes mentioned that she had been found with strange, unexplained bruises on her wrists and ankles, as if she had been restrained. Her personal effects included a silver locket, identical to the one Mark had found. One evening, Mark was working late, the only person in the old wing. The tapping had been particularly persistent that day, and he was feeling a growing sense of dread. He was about to pack up and leave when he heard a new sound, a faint, mournful humming coming from the corridor outside the archives. The humming was a lullaby, a soft, sweet melody that seemed to drift through the air. Mark felt a strange pull towards it, a sense of curiosity overriding his fear. He slowly opened the door to the archives and peered out into the dark corridor. Standing at the end of the hallway, bathed in the faint glow of the emergency lights, was a figure. It was a woman dressed in a white hospital gown, her back to him. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her back, and she was gently swaying back and forth, humming the lullaby. Mark knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that it was Clara Jenkins. He could feel her presence, a cold, sorrowful energy that filled the corridor. He wanted to run, but he couldn't move. He was mesmerized by the humming, by the gentle sway of her body. He watched as she slowly turned her head, and he saw her face. Her eyes were wide and vacant, staring straight ahead. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her lips were a faint blue. But what truly horrified Mark was her hands. They were clasped together in front of her, and her fingernails were worn down, almost to the quick, as if she had been scratching at something for a very long time. And then she raised her hands to her chest, and Mark saw it, the silver locket, clutched tightly in her grasp. She opened it, and then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she began to tap her fingernail against the faded photograph inside. Tap, tap, tap. Mark finally broke free from his trance. He screamed, a guttural sound of pure terror, and stumbled backward into the archives, slamming the door shut behind him. He leaned against it, gasping for breath, his heart pounding. He heard the humming stop, and then he heard the tapping, coming from directly outside the door, growing louder, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. Mark didn't wait. He scrambled out of the archives through a back exit, not caring about his belongings or his work. He ran through the hospital, not stopping until he was outside, breathing in the cold night air. He never returned to that hospital. He transferred his residency to a different city, a different state. He finished his medical degree, and he became a successful doctor. But he never forgot Clara Jenkins or the sound of her tapping. He says he still sometimes hears it late at night when he's alone. A faint, rhythmic tap, 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 reminding him of the unseen visitor who still haunts the old wing of that hospital, forever trying to tell her story. Our final story comes from Sarah, a young, ambitious nurse who had just started her first job at a prestigious private hospital. Sarah was excited, eager to prove herself, and determined to make a difference. But her idealism would soon be tested by the dark secret of the night nurse. The hospital was known for its state-of-the-art facilities and its high-profile patients. Sarah was assigned to the oncology ward, a place where hope and despair are often intertwined. She quickly learned the ropes, adapting to the demanding schedule and the emotional toll of caring for critically ill patients. Her first few weeks were challenging but rewarding. She loved her job, and she felt a sense of purpose. But then she started noticing something strange about one of the senior night nurses, a woman named Nurse Evelyn. Nurse Evelyn was a quiet, almost ethereal woman in her late 50s. She had a gentle demeanor and a calming presence, and the patients seemed to adore her. But Sarah noticed that Nurse Evelyn had a peculiar habit. She would often spend long periods of time in the rooms of patients who were in critical condition, especially those who were not expected to live through the night. Sarah initially thought nothing of it. Perhaps Nurse Evelyn was simply providing comfort to the dying, a compassionate gesture. But then she noticed that these patients, after Nurse Evelyn's visits, would often pass away within minutes or hours of her leaving the room. It was too consistent to be a coincidence. One night, a patient named Mr. Harrison, an elderly man with advanced cancer, was rapidly declining. The doctors had told his family that he wouldn't make it through the night. Sarah was preparing his medication when she saw Nurse Evelyn enter Mr. Harrison's room. The door closed softly behind her. Sarah felt a prickle of unease. She couldn't explain it, but something about Nurse Evelyn's presence in the room felt wrong. She decided to keep an eye on the clock. Nurse Evelyn remained in the room for almost an hour. When she finally emerged, her face was serene, almost peaceful. Minutes later, Mr. Harrison's heart monitor flatlined. Sarah rushed into the room, but it was too late. Mr. Harrison was gone. Sarah tried to dismiss her suspicions. It was a coincidence, she told herself. Nurse Evelyn was just a dedicated nurse, providing comfort to the dying, but the pattern continued. Another patient, a young woman named Maria, was in a coma after a severe car accident. Her family had been told to prepare for the worst. Nurse Evelyn spent an hour in Maria's room. Maria passed away shortly after. Sarah couldn't ignore it anymore. She started discreetly observing Nurse Evelyn. She noticed that Nurse Evelyn would always enter the critical patients' rooms alone, and she would always emerge with that same serene, almost detached expression. One night, Sarah decided to take a risk. A patient named Mrs. Rodriguez, a woman in her 90s with multiple organ failure, was not expected to last the night. Sarah saw Nurse Evelyn enter Mrs. Rodriguez's room. This time, Sarah didn't wait. She crept down the hallway and peered through the small window in the door. What she saw made her blood run cold. Nurse Evelyn was standing by Mrs. Rodriguez's bedside, her back to the door. She was holding Mrs. Rodriguez's hand, and she was humming a soft, mournful tune. But it wasn't the humming that terrified Sarah. It was what Nurse Evelyn was doing with her other hand. She was gently stroking Mrs. Rodriguez's forehead, and as she did, a faint, shimmering mist seemed to rise from Mrs. Rodriguez's body and coalesce around Nurse Evelyn's hand. The mist was a pale, translucent blue, and it seemed to pulse with a faint light. Nurse Evelyn then slowly brought her hand to her own mouth and, with a deep, deliberate breath, inhaled the mist. As she did, a faint, almost imperceptible glow seemed to emanate from her body, and her eyes, for a fleeting moment, seemed to glow with an unnatural light. Sarah gasped, stumbling backward from the door. She had just witnessed something impossible, something that defied all logic and reason. Nurse Evelyn wasn't just comforting the dying. She was consuming their life force. Sarah ran to the nurse's station, her mind racing. She had to tell someone. But who would believe her? It sounded insane. She decided to confront Nurse Evelyn directly. She waited until Nurse Evelyn emerged from Mrs. Rodriguez's room, her face once again serene. Sarah approached her, her voice trembling. "Nurse Evelyn," Sarah began. I saw what you did in there." Nurse Evelyn's serene expression didn't change. She simply looked at Sarah with her calm, knowing eyes. "You saw what you needed to see, dear," she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "It is the natural order of things. Life feeds on life. You're killing them," Sarah stammered. Nurse Evelyn smiled, a gentle, sad smile. "No, dear. I am simply helping them transition. And in doing so, I am sustaining myself. It is a cycle as old as time itself." Sarah was horrified. She tried to report Nurse Evelyn to the hospital administration, but they dismissed her claims as stress-induced hallucinations. They suggested she take a leave of absence, citing her recent erratic behavior. Sarah knew she couldn't stay. She resigned from the hospital that week, her dreams of making a difference shattered. She never worked in a hospital again. Years later, Sarah still wonders about Nurse Evelyn. She sometimes checks the hospital's website, and she sees that Nurse Evelyn is still listed as a senior night nurse, her picture showing a woman who hasn't aged a day. Sarah believes that Nurse Evelyn is an ancient entity, a being that feeds on the dying, sustaining her own unnatural existence. She says it's a terrifying thought, but it's the only explanation that makes sense. She wanted to share her story as a warning. Not all monsters lurk in the shadows. Some wear scrubs and walk the hospital halls, their true nature hidden behind a mask of compassion. And that concludes our journey into the chilling world of hospital horror. These stories serve as a stark reminder that even in places dedicated to healing, darkness can find a way to thrive. If these tales have left you with a lingering sense of unease, please give this video a thumbs up and let us know in the comments which story sent the most shivers down your spine. Do you have your own true hospital horror story? Share it with us at our mail and description box, and it might be featured in a future video. Don't forget to subscribe to Haunt Zone for more terrifying true stories, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. We bring you new horror content every week, guaranteed to keep you on the edge of your seat. Visit our channel for more spine-chilling content. And remember, sometimes the most terrifying truths are found in the most unexpected places. Until next time, stay safe and try to get some sleep, if you can. Thanks for watching Haunt Zone, and we'll see you in the next one.